This is another fishing podcast.
This is from the great Jason Mitchell. And I've wondered this, what's the proper way to tip a spoon with a minnow, right? What are the proper ways? From a real pro like Jason Mitchell, he knows, he did a tip, and this is from Target Walleye. I learned about this, and Jason Mitchell Outdoors. This is a tip that I think is really important. Jason's a stick, man. And so I'm going to use this tip when I go out the next time ice fishing. And I just want to pass this along because it's great info. And it only is going to, you're only going to get this info from a guy that really spends as much time on the water as Jason does. So this is really valuable. I think that's why I'm sharing it with you. Enjoy.
Let's talk using spoons specifically for walleyes or perch. Now, if you use a lot of spoons fishing for walleyes or perch, I'm going to show you a couple different things.
Let me start from the beginning, because this is really important. Okay, so we're going to bring this up. It's technical stuff here. All right, Jason, take it away.
Let's talk using spoons specifically for walleyes or perch. Now, if you use a lot of spoons fishing for walleyes or perch, I'm going to show you a couple different things as far as rigging up your minnow. And this doesn't really matter so much what kind of spoon you're using. Right now I'm using a ribbon flutter spoon, but if you're using a rattle spoon, doesn't matter. There's just certain things that you can do with a minnow during certain situations I believe will help you catch a lot more walleyes, especially when we're talking walleye fishing. Now you see here, this spoon here's got a lot of horizontal flutter. When you drop it, it just drops horizontal. And a lot of times we're using big poles, big lifts to pull fish in. And sometimes with your aggressive fish, they'll hit it on that big drop. But so often what happens is the fish comes right up on you and you're just twitching that spoon to try to trigger that fish. And basically that spoon is just a delivery for that minnow or minnow head to get that minnow to rock on the bottom to trigger the fish. And so I'm going to show you what this looks like with a full minnow. So a lot of times, especially dirty water, places where you have really aggressive fish and big fish, like say for example like a Lake Winnipeg as an example, or sometimes the fish are really fired up on a place like Devil's Lake or Red Lake, we'll use a full minnow just because you have just more profile, more attraction to pull these fish in. And so when I'm using a full minnow, I still like to use a fat head.
It's a sexy
a lot,
bait well,
just because of their durable.
Container.
And so when I'm using a full minnow and I'm jigging aggressively with it, I'll usually go right through the top of the head and actually kill the minnow.
This is important. Check this out.
Because again, I'm jigging this bait where I don't need that minnow swimming around. Now, if I'm dead sticking with a spoon, I'll fish these minnows so that they're alive. But a lot of times I just go right through the top of the head. And you see there, just adds a little bit of profile. And that's what it looks like. Okay. Minnow hooked through the top of the head, right through the skull where it just stays on. You're just trying to find something that's durable.
That looks pretty good.
That's one way to hook a minnow. I would say 80% of the time, especially if we're fishing in the States, where these fish can be a little bit fussier, is I'm pinching that minnow head off. I'm going through the top of the skull, and I'm pinching that minnow head off right behind the gill plate. And basically what you're doing is you're putting some scent into the water, but when you do your big lifts, try to bring fish in, and then when the fish come up on you, when you bounce that spoon, you're just getting that treble hook to rock back and forth. And they key in on that minnow head, and minnow head, just a smaller profile for them. It's just easier for them to punch, and you're just giving those fish just a smaller target. Now, if you can imagine when a fish comes in and hits this, these fish have to move their gills and suck in enough water to pull that whole spoon in. When that minnow head is pinched off like that, and basically the whole thing is hanging vertically. And so here's something that's really, really important, is that your aggressive fish like that right there, and they're going to come in, they're just going to punch that bottom spoon. But sometimes what happens is if you get just an off bite where those fish aren't moving enough water through their gills.
Now watch this.
Sometimes just using a head like that, the fish aren't punching the bait hard, and it's kind of a deal where the fish is all over you and you just feel the weight of the fish when you lift the rod tip up. That bite is just off a little bit and it's hard to detect bites. Something that can work really well is instead of using a minnow head, pinch that minnow further back behind the gill plate where that minnow will ride up horizontal. I'll show you what that looks like.
This is really, really, look at that cool bait container. I like it. But this is really, really cool here.
So again, I'm going through the top of the skull and out the bottom. It just seems like it's just more durable and the minnow hangs on a little better. But instead of pinching it right behind the gills, I'm going further back. I'm going back far enough where basically I leave that air bladder intact. And so when you put that air bladder in there, you can see there when it's resting, that minnow has a tendency to hang more horizontal. And it seems like,
look at that.
When fish are off, they have an easier time sucking in that horizontal profile versus the vertical profile, even though it's smaller. And so on an off bite, as crazy as it sounds, sometimes you're better off using more minnow just so that they can hang on that minnow and suck it in horizontally. They don't have to move as much water to get that in, where you'll just see them they suck it in, they suck in a little more, they choke up on it, and they can load up that rod tip. And so just a couple of different ways to rig minnows. I would say 80% of the time, I'm just using the head, just pinched out behind the gill, just offering just a little bit of meat on that bottom treble to bounce. Those fish come in and they punch it. If you get bites where it's hard to distinguish the bite because they're not grabbing it and pushing forward, hook the minnow so that you have more air in the minnow where it hangs horizontal. They can grab onto it and suck into it, and it seems like that ups your batting average. And so switch between those two things. And if you're on fisheries where those fish just want that big profile, don't be afraid to use a whole minnow. But that's kind of the options you have. Whole minnow, sometimes even multiple minnows on a treble hook. You've got the minnow head and you've got the half minnow, but experiment between those three things. There's different ways that you can do this. Don't think that you just have to use a minnow head or you just have to use a full minnow. Experiment and play around with that, because what you're going to find is that there's going to be times where one works really, really well. I've seen it over and over again where that half minnow trick gets them. There's other times where just using the minnow head gets them if you're missing fish on a whole minnow. But experiment between those three options: minnow head, half minnow, and full minnow. You'll get in a rhythm where you'll catch way more walleyes using spoons here this ice season.
Yeah, so I think that's just really, really good information there, and I'm not surprised that Jason's providing that kind of information, because he is a treasure trove. His brain is full of all kinds of fishing data, and the fact that he's able to share it with us and impart his wisdom, I really do appreciate it. And I've worked with Jason. Jason's been on the podcast before, and he's just a great dude. I really like him. Very down to earth and just a fantastic fisherman. So I think it's just good info. I'm gonna use. There's some lakes around me that I'm gonna try using that tip this winter. So I think that's really, really good. I say really, really a lot. I've noticed that. I'm going to try to stop saying really, really.